April 14, 1944. Northern New Guinea. The rain began just before dawn, light at first, then heavier, then relentless. Warm sheets of water slid through towering jungle leaves and soaked the dirt into a slick black skin. Fog moved low across the ridgeline, bending through trees like drifting smoke. Somewhere beyond the canopy, distant artillery rumbled like faraway thunder that never quite arrived. High above a narrow enemy supply corridor carved between two jungle slopes, a single figure lay motionless. He occupied a place no map recorded, a ridge that only existed because erosion had shaped it and war had chosen it. Wrapped in vines and shadow, he waited as if the jungle itself had grown a spine and learned how to aim. His name, at least the one printed on the faded tag beneath his shirt, was Hale. For 4 nights straight, the jungle refused to sleep. Radio traffic from nearby patrols had gone quiet in fragments. Final words cut short by static. Small units moved out and never returned. Enemy movement grew sharper and faster with no clear pattern. Ambushes bloomed where no scouts had been seen. Retreats collapsed without contact. The battlefield felt guided by something unseen. Hale did not move. What separated him from other snipers was not his aim. It was not his patience. It was not even the rifle pressed against his shoulder. It was the strange object fixed beneath the barrel. A dull cylinder, rough metal, about the size of a soup can. It swallowed moonlight instead of reflecting it. No markings, no serial stamp, no official inventory tag. The device existed without permission. Before he ever stepped into the Pacific heat, Hale had crossed paths with a man who officially did not exist. A civilian metallurgist, whose work never appeared on any authorized research list. Only a single technical notation survived inside a sealed archive. Material behavior inconsistent with known alloys. Program status suppressed. The alloy from that vanished program now lined the interior of the metal cylinder beneath Hale's rifle. This was where the war around him began to fracture. If stories of lost weapons and forgotten battles matter to you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends right now and tell us where you are watching from around the world. History lives wherever it is remembered. The second night brought the first shot. Not loud, not sharp, barely louder than rain striking leaf. Enemy scouts following the ridge below froze in place. Then split apart. Half moved left, half moved downhill. They chased a sound that arrived ahead of the gunfire itself. Another sound followed from behind them. They turned again. The jungle answered every movement with contradiction. Hale remained still. Down below, patrols marched into empty ground. Entire squads drifted toward false danger. Supply routes shifted around threats that did not exist. Officers issued corrections that led nowhere. The valley itself seemed to rearrange where sound lived. If you are watching this and you love uncovering hidden war stories like this one, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and drop your country in the comments so the world can see how far these stories travel. By the third night, commanders on both sides believed multiple snipers were operating in perfect coordination. Reports came in of shots that struck before the echo arrived. Footsteps that traveled uphill faster than gravity allowed. Flashlights triggered movement that vanished when approached. Only one man was firing. Hale did not change position. His breathing remained even. His pulse stayed slow. Every time the trigger moved, the jungle spoke from somewhere else entirely. The cylinder bent sound like water bends light. Every report arrived displaced. Every echo arrived unfaithful to its source. Enemy units responded to danger that never stood where it sounded. If this moment fascinates you, subscribe now to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us your city in the comments. Every location added becomes part of this global audience of memory. By dawn of the third day, entire formations had been dragged into false valleys. Supply columns halted at imaginary threats. Officers argued over maps that contradicted the field. The jungle felt alive with misdirection. Then something changed. On the fourth night, Hale did not report in. Short transmissions that had arrived at irregular intervals vanished completely. Radio silence stretched across hours. Then into dawn. Command tried again. Nothing answered. Rescue teams were ordered forward. Each squad halted before reaching the ridge. They reported hearing movement ahead and behind at the same time. They reported hearing their own steps echo from the wrong direction. Something in the jungle seemed to warn them away without showing itself. Command quietly prepared to list Hale as missing. If you are feeling this tension with him, take a second and subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends so these stories continue to surface. And tell us where you are watching from. Even the jungle listens. Then the tally began to form. Scattered confirmations across 5 days. No single firefight. No airstrike summary. No conventional engagement. Every report stood alone. Locations mismatched. Units conflicted. Yet the count continued to rise. 112. No single officer could explain it. And then, without signal or warning, Hale returned. Just after dawn on the 5th day, he stepped out of the jungle alone, exhausted, covered in grime. His rifle hung from his shoulder. The metal cylinder was gone. When questioned, he said it malfunctioned, that it was discarded somewhere along the ridge, that it had never worked as intended. Every field report contradicted him. If you are still watching right now, you are exactly the kind of person we tell these stories for. Subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and leave your location below so this forgotten ridge lives again through your screen. Weeks later, engineers attempted to recreate the device using standard steel. Every replication failed. The sound behavior vanished. The misdirection vanished. The battlefield illusion vanished. Only then did intelligence uncover the truth. The alloy inside Hale's device was not from any approved supply line. It had been hidden within a research path shut down before it officially existed. Worse still, the man who created it vanished 2 days after Hale deployed. No remains were found. No transfer records existed. His workspace was stripped clean, without paperwork. Even his name disappeared from a ledger. Only the stamped word suppressed remained. If this mystery has captured you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends now and share where you are watching from. These unanswered questions survive through the people who keep asking them. Hale never spoke of the device again. Years later, long after the war became memory, a rusted cylinder was recovered beneath that same ridge. Inside, the strange alloy remained intact, still unclassified, still impossible to reproduce. Modern testing mirrored the original battlefield recordings. Sound where none should be, movement where nothing stood, direction without origin. And with every experiment, the same unanswered question returned. If one suppressed alloy could bend a battlefield once, what else was buried that never reached the front? April 16, 1944. Northern New Guinea. The rain eased just enough to let the jungle breathe again. Steam lifted from the forest floor in slow white ribbons, drifting between trees like the ghosts of movements that had never happened. Somewhere far below the ridge, broken units tried to reassemble. Maps were spread across damp crates. Radios hissed with confusion. No officer could agree on where the fighting had truly taken place, because no one could agree on where Hale had truly been. The official explanation formed quickly. Enemy patrol collisions, miscommunication, panic spreading faster than facts. The count of 112 was quietly stamped as unconfirmed, a number that solved nothing. The ridge was declared a statistical illusion of war. But the jungle never repeats illusions the same way twice. For the men who had turned back during the rescue attempt, the sound still followed them. Footsteps behind them that did not belong to their platoon. A single metallic echo that arrived late, as if sound itself were searching for the past. None of them would ever admit it openly. None of them would ever forget it either. Hale had returned to duty stripped of his anomaly. No special device. No explanation that survived scrutiny. His rifle sounded like every other rifle now. Clean, honest, deadly in the ordinary way. Intelligence wanted silence more than answers. They sealed the Metallurgist's file inside nested classifications. The suppressed alloy entered a registry that no engineer, without 3 clearances, could even acknowledge. The research program received a retroactive shutdown date that predated its own funding. On paper, it had never existed. But equipment logs are harder to erase than people. Deep in a Pacific Supply archive, a single weight discrepancy remained unresolved. A crate that shipped heavier than its inventory allowed. The difference matched exactly the mass of the rusted cylinder later recovered beneath the ridge. Someone had shipped it. Someone had signed for it. Someone had closed their eyes afterward. By the time analysts noticed, the war had moved on. If you are following this trail of hidden decisions and unanswered signatures, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends now and tell us where you are watching from. These buried connections only surface when people stay curious. The second twist of the story did not arrive in the jungle. It arrived years later in a quiet laboratory. Decades after the fighting ended, long after the ridge had been renamed by erosion and vines, modern materials scientists received a sealed artifact for testing. The recovery team had found it during a post-war survey beneath a collapsed embankment. A rusted cylinder buried where no supply dump had ever existed. Its exterior fell apart at touch. The interior remained wrong. The alloy inside did not behave like metal. Sound passed through it faster in some directions than others. Vibrations vanished entirely at unexpected angles. Under pressure, the material grew quieter instead of louder. No physics model could map its behavior without breaking itself. Every attempt to recreate it failed. The test report carried a single footnote that echoed the old wartime archive. Material behavior inconsistent with known alloys. Program reference listed as suppressed. No author. No origin. No explanation. If this discovery has you questioning how many hidden technologies vanished with the war, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and share where you are watching from. Every comment pushes forgotten science back into the light. Back in 1944, Hale's redeployment raised no red flags publicly. Privately, fractured questions followed him. Why had he returned without the device? Why had no one heard a malfunction? Why did the jungle still echo wrong when weather was right? Why had he refused every commendation tied to the ridge? Hale never answered. What he carried instead was silence. And silence spreads differently than sound. By late April, reports came in from a neighboring sector. Patrols described hearing false gunfire without contact. Officers blamed nerves. Veterans knew better. The jungle had learned a new language and did not entirely forget it when the speaker left. Then the command decision arrived that ended all inquiry at once. Hale was reassigned. No explanation. No ceremony. A transfer order that moved him across island chains faster than questions could follow. The ridge faded into rear-line rumor. The device faded into sealed ledgers. The metallurgist faded into absence. War does this well. It closes its own doors before anyone notices where they lead. If you are still here with this story as the trail grows colder, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and drop your location in the comments. Some frontlines only exist in memory. The moral dilemma of the ridge never entered official narrative. The use of a technology that commanders did not understand. The manipulation of sound that reshaped movement without revealing the weapon itself. The casualties that could not be traced to a visible exchange of force. Victory without evidence. It made commanders uneasy. It made historians frustrated. It made silence convenient. Years later, when tapes and transcripts eased into declassification, fragments of the ridge surfaced without their heart attached. Redacted coordinates, edited casualty tables, communications logs with missing timestamps. One exchange in particular drew attention. A senior officer asking if the sound-bending effect could be replicated at scale. The reply was brief. Only if the source alloy was found again. It never was. The metallurgist's disappearance hardened into legend. Some believed he fled. Some believed he was erased. Some believed he never existed at all, a convenient fiction built around equipment that no one could explain. But disappearance leaves ripples. A family inquiry filed under the wrong surname. A bank account that closed itself without a death certificate. A workshop lease that expired quietly without retrieval of tools. Someone had lived. Someone had built something impossible, then vanished inside the same silence he helped create. If that vanishing unsettles you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends now and tell us where you're watching from. Every unanswered life deserves to be remembered somewhere. By the war's end, Hale's name appeared nowhere near any major citation. He was not listed among famous snipers. He did not receive headlines. No montage followed his record. The official numbers attached to his unit never matched 112. History moved on without him, but sound did not. Modern acoustic studies of the ridge recorded irregular echoes that could not be reproduced elsewhere. Researchers suspected unusual rock formations. Others blamed vegetation density. None could explain why directional sound behaved differently only along the exact strip where Hale once laid unseen. Terrain remembers. The ridge never forgot the shape of the device that once lay against it. And still the deepest mystery remained unanswered. Why would a suppressed alloy ever exist to bend sound this way? What battlefield problem had required silence that could move itself? What future weapon had been abandoned before it ever fully arrived? The war buried many things. Not all of them stayed buried. If this story has pulled you into its shadows, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and share the city or country where you're watching from. Every voice helps keep these hidden chapters alive. By the time modern testing concluded, no governing body claimed ownership of the artifact. No lab accepted custodial responsibility. The final report was sealed under dual jurisdiction and quietly archived. The file closed the same way it always had, suppressed. But suppression does not erase effect. It only delays it. Somewhere between physics and memory, the soup can still exist not as an object, but as a question that refuses to dissolve. A question that bends sound one last time away from certainty. April 26, 1944. Somewhere between island chains in the western Pacific, the sea was calm in a way that made men uneasy. Flat water reflected the sky, so cleanly it felt like looking into another world below the hull. Hale stood alone near the rail of the transport ship as it cut through that quiet reflection. He did not carry his rifle openly anymore. It was sealed below deck. Ordinary now. Honest now. Stripped of the impossible. The ridge was already fading behind him. Command had done what command always did when questions grew sharp enough to cut upward. They moved the question away. Hale's transfer papers listed him as experienced reconnaissance support. No mention of the ridge. No mention of the count. No mention of the device. His next assignment would bury him inside normal warfare, where outcomes could be traced to bullets and bombs again. But normal warfare no longer felt real to him. Every night on that ship, as the engines hummed beneath the deck, Hale listened to sound travel through steel. He listened for echoes that arrived too late or too early. He listened for movement that bent space the way the jungle once had. But the ship answered only with honest noise. The world had returned to obeying itself. That was what unsettled him most. Back on the ridge, sound had lied. And it had done so cleanly. Weeks turned into months. The war widened. Battles overwrote one another so fast that memory struggled to keep pace. Hale served where he was placed. He followed orders. He recorded nothing extraordinary. His silence folded into the larger silence of millions of men whose names would never appear in any headline. The metallurgy program was never reopened, but fragments of it drifted quietly into other projects. A subtle change in vibration dampening here. A classified acoustic experiment there. A memo that moved sideways through departments before being sealed again. Nothing ever named the ridge. Nothing ever named Hale. Nothing ever named the vanished man who shaped the alloy. Yet the idea survived. Sound that could be told where to go. Sound that could be convinced to lie. By late 1945, the war collapsed into ash and relief and uncountable loss. Men returned home. Factories fell quiet. Records were sorted, redacted, burned, and boxed. The ridge in northern New Guinea returned fully to jungle. Vines swallowed the scar where a single man once shaped an entire valley with absence. The official count of 112 was never confirmed again. It hovered inside footnotes that never quite survived publication. Hale vanished into civilian life the same way the Metallurgist vanished into sealed absence. No interviews. No memoirs. No long explanations in later years when journalists became curious about odd casualty patterns that could not be tied to traditional battles. He lived quietly. And then, years later, he died quietly. No one tied his death to the ridge. But death reopened silence. When personal effects were sorted, an envelope surfaced inside a drawer that no one had ever opened. Inside it was a single folded map fragment. A section of jungle. A ridge that did not appear on official charts. A small, handwritten marking beside it. Sound learns. That was all. The rusted cylinder did not reappear until decades later. It was found not by soldiers, but by surveyors measuring erosion along an old embankment. The hillside collapsed during a seasonal flood. Mud pulled loose the skeleton of the ridge. Roots tore free earth that had not seen daylight since the war. Buried among stones and twisted metal fragments lay the cylinder, hollowed on the outside, intact within. It was passed through hands quietly. No announcement, no press release, no explanation of what it was supposed to be. The alloy inside still resisted classification. Labs could describe what it did, but not how it did it. Sound obeyed it the way light obeyed glass, but with rules none of the models predicted. More troubling was what the alloy refused to do. It would not resonate. It absorbed vibration without heat. It displaced energy without surrendering it. A weapon that did not strike. A force that did not reveal itself. Engineers argued if it had ever been meant for a rifle. Some believed it was only a flawed prototype for something larger. Something that had never been finished. If that unfinished vision had ever reached scale, history would not remember sound the same way. The final report was sealed. Again, years passed. Then more years. The ridge returned fully to unnamed wilderness. No plaque marked it. No coordinates survived in open archives. The jungle grew thick again, where men once chased echoes that had no source. Only the interviews remained. Fragments salvaged from declassified war correspondence. Pages where officers asked why sound arrived from the wrong directions. Where patrols described being pulled into emptiness by phantom footsteps. Where no one ever once described seeing Hale if they did not already know he was supposed to be there. He had become sound himself, present without position. The Metallurgist never reappeared in any record. Theories grew around his absence. Some believed the program consumed him. Some believed he erased himself to keep the alloy buried. Some believed he was buried with it. None of those theories solved the problem that still lingers. Someone had learned how to teach sound to lie, and then chose to make that knowledge disappear. If silence could be engineered once, it could be engineered again. The question is not whether the alloy will ever be recreated. The question is why it was allowed to vanish when it already worked. Modern acoustic research occasionally brushes near the edge of that old discovery. Papers reference anomalies they cannot fully explain. Devices behave too cleanly at their boundaries. Sound behaves too politely inside new materials. Each time those projects near the ridge of understanding, they slow and stop. Funding dries. Leadership changes. Files close. The word suppressed remains alive inside modern systems. The ridge still listens. If you stand there today in the right weather, there are moments when wind bends strangely between the trees. When footsteps echo in directions your eyes cannot follow. when sound hesitates before choosing where it belongs. Locals avoid the place without knowing why. They say the jungle learned something during the war and never forgot it. Hale's name exists now only in scattered documentation without narrative. A tag number, a transfer order, a sealed inquiry that no longer accepts questions. The 112 remain an unassigned total in casualty tables that historians quietly circle without answers. The metallurgist remains a man without a line in any registry, except for one, inside a suppressed archive where material behavior never matched the rules it was supposed to follow. This story survives only because fragments escaped perfect erasure. A map scrap, a rusted cylinder, a handful of reports that never aligned with the rest of the war, and one ridge that taught the jungle how to move sound without moving itself. If one suppressed alloy could bend the battlefield once, then the true question is not what it did. The true question is what it was meant to become, and whether its silence was the final failure or the final success. If stories like this remind you how deep the hidden front lines of history really run, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you're watching from around the world. Every voice that remembers pulls another forgotten truth back into the light.